This is The Micro Effect.
The Micro Effect. www.themicroeffect.com.
You take the blue pill. The story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
There was a mighty nation, blessed above all of creation. It was a rare and precious pearl, conceived in faith and liberty, home of the brave, land of the free. It was the envy of the world. But this shining city on a hill has turned from the Creator's will and let evil take control. Now the reckless men who lead them want to strip away their freedom and to steal their very soul. Now it's smoke and mirrors, switching bait, criticize and confiscate and let the guilty walk away. In this once righteous, godly nation, in the halls of education, they forbid a child to pray. They say we need to spread the wealth. They pretend to guard the health of the feeble and the poor, while the hand they hold behind their back confuses and conceals the fact that the wolf is at the door. There's an unseen hand.
Well, welcome. It's Tuesday morning, June 26, 2018, and we have a beautiful day here in Montana. And I want to thank our listeners for connecting the dots with us every Tuesday morning. And I want to also ask our listeners to tune in to Debbie Boscalupi's Radioactive Wednesday. Her program is in at the same time as mine, and we cover many of the same subjects. So please join in and join Debbie tomorrow morning. Also, I want to support our radio network. We need to make sure that we support this radio network. It is a fantastic radio network. We are reaching very, very many people all over North America, and we even get callers in from across the sea. So we've got callers from different parts of the world here. So please support this radio network and support our sponsors. Today I have a very special guest on the radio show, and that is Dr. Duke Pesta. And Dr. Pesta is the one of the founders, and he is the academic director of Freedom Project Academy, and that is a group that promotes homeschooling. And we obviously have a lot of problems in our school system, and we're going to cover all those problems today, and we're going to be looking for solutions. So with that, Dr. Pesta, please give our listeners a brief description of your background in the educational arena and why you feel that we need a new direction in the education of our young people.
Well, thanks for having me today. I appreciate it. I am a 25-year university professor, so I'm a professor of English at the University of Wisconsin. I have taught at 7 different universities. I have been an educational reformer. I have given over 700 talks on Common Core and the federal takeover of American government schools in about 46 states. I've testified before about 20 state legislatures about the issue. And I'm also the director of Freedom Project Academy. As you said, it's an online homeschool, live teachers teaching your kids in the safety of the home through the computer. And we have classes from kindergarten through high school. We are a fully accredited school, which means moms and dads who come with us, they get degrees that will get them into colleges. We've got kids in colleges all over the country. And we are a classical education format. In other words, we reject the ideology and the politics and the sexualization that goes on in the public schools and give a traditional classical education to kids, the kind of education that made American education preeminent before it began to fall to pieces. And so all of those aspects of education are things that concern me very much. I also speak quite frequently on the politicization of university campuses and how social justice education is displacing actual achievement-based education on our colleges and university campuses, and what that means for kids going to college.
Right, and it does have a huge impact. I think we all recognize the radical changes in education and realize that the direction of public education is toward total domination of the system by secular humanism. And why is this important to recognize?
Well, it's not just secular humanism. Secular humanism was a phase in the development of this weird idea that America was not a Christian country, or that the founding fathers wanted to see religion banished from every aspect of public life. That secular humanist phase from about the mid-1960s till about 1990, that's past now. And what I say what we're dealing with now is anti-theistic, anti-Western values humanism. It's a much more aggressive strain, and the word that defines it is social justice. I think that's the word that's used now. Social justice, which is nothing really more than warmed-over Marxist dialectic. The socialists, the communists failed politically almost everywhere in the world, failed miserably, and yet the ideology has adapted so that it is not primarily found at the highest levels of government. It's found now in the schools. This is a long-standing Marxist idea that if we can just get our hands and start indoctrinating kids in elementary school with quasi-Marxist values, by the time they become voting-age adults, they will be completely malleable to our social engineering. And the American public school system and the American university school system has pretty much become, first and foremost, a molding ground, a shaping ground for the kinds of progressive citizens that leftists want. I'm not saying that your kids will be utterly illiterate if they go to government schools. I'm not saying that your kids will get no education at an American public university. What I'm saying is that the primary purpose of universities and government public schools now is to mold and shape the kids so that they can receive radically leftist ideas, that they vote radically progressive ways, that they are very sympathetic to socialism. They are skeptical of capitalism and free markets. They look at the founding history of America as a racist history rather than as a great leap forward for human culture. And so what's happening again is that you see this social justice revolution, which seems to dictate that first turn them into programmable citizens of the New World Order, and only secondarily worry about their academic achievement. And we really do see the results of this now with very, very underperforming government schools in most states. Less than 40% of American school kids in most states cannot read at age level, cannot do math at age level. So it's pretty staggering when you think about how the pace of our kids' education has been dramatically retarded. The one thing that is on the rise in our kids, it's not academic achievement, it's a lot of the social policies that progressives want to implement. We begin to see kids at younger and younger ages now, even as early as elementary school, being groomed and trained to sort of parrot left-wing social talking points.
Yes, and as a matter of fact, we've always heard that somehow we won the Cold War with the fall of communism in the Soviet Union, and of course, I think a lot of us realize that communism just went underground. It's a dialectic where actually communism turned into sustainable development and many of the things that promote the same ideology. They just kind of went underground because they knew they couldn't win the battle economically and they couldn't win it politically, but they have, or they are in the process of winning it politically by doing it very subversively. And the way that they do that, and they've said it all along, is through our youth. They are going to take our youth. They are going to steal the next generation, and they're going to turn them into young Marxists. And I think a lot of us see that happening today.
I think what you said is exactly right. The only Cold War we won when the wall came down and the Soviet Union crumbled, the only war we actually won was the economic war. Now, that's a big front. That is a huge battle to win. I think that in the 1980s we demonstrated definitively that Western systems of economics, capitalism and free markets, were vastly, vastly superior to socialist models. But we didn't win the political battle, and we didn't win the ideological battle, and we didn't win the cultural battle. And if you think about since the mid-1980s, the degree to which Hollywood has taken a radically hard turn left, the way our universities now have been utterly co-opted by progressive Marxists, the way that media, the vast majority of our media, is unapologetically leftist now and using their power to twist and push kids in a certain direction. When you see that, I think you're exactly right. Things like environmentalism have been co-opted by Marxism. Much of the cultural, racial discussions that we have in this country are informed by Marxist thought. Groups like Antifa and Black Lives Matter, they're much less about race and much more about political change based on Marxist ideals, revolution. And so, yes, and I think that we have lost more than, we've already lost a generation to these kind of teachers, these kind of cultural positions. We've already lost at least one generation of young people, which is to say that the majority of the young, if the millennials alone had voted in the last election, it would have been a very different election. Sizable numbers of people 30 and under are much more comfortable with socialism than they are with free markets. Of course, when you ask them to define free markets, they can't do it. When you ask them to talk meaningfully about the history of socialism over the last 150 years, they're utterly incapable of doing it. This is just, and this is where, and I think this is an important point, this is where the educational stuff interacts with the cultural Marxist stuff. People ask me all the time, why in the world are our public schools consciously making kids dumber? And that's the answer, because we don't want smart kids who challenge Marxist narratives. We don't want the historically informed graduate of college who can say, well, wait a second, I know enough to know that over the last 150 years, socialist leftist movements have murdered more people than almost any other ideology in the history of the world. We don't want modern college kids to graduate completely aware of the sacrifices and virtues that went into creating this American republic. If they know those things, they are not going to be lulled into the silly complacency of socialist thought. So if we dumb them down, if we lower their overall level of education, if we keep them rather ignorant about politics and history and economics, they are much, much more receptive to simple-minded left-wing socialist arguments.
Well, that's always been the bottom line with Marxism, is that it has that utopian appeal because it's very simple-minded. It's all buzzwords. It's all warm and fuzzy thinking that isn't very deep. And I know that part of the plan is to get people to buy into this stuff through those kind of fuzzy notions, and of course that goes back to the Frankfurt School, the Antonio Gramsci and the Prison Notebooks. The idea that we can do it, we can create Marxism within our culture by doing it very clandestinely and doing it in a way that has the most impact, which is through our youth. And so that's exactly what you're trying to get around. And I would like to, well, first of all, I'd like you to kind of describe the differences between classical liberal education and the Marxist stuff that is being promoted in our public school systems today.
Yep, and before I do that, just to comment on your last comment, I think you used the word utopia, and I think that's exactly right. The idea of all of this Marxist leftism is the envisioning of a world that is utterly impossible in this fallen place we live. The idea that you can, as Dostoevsky, the great Christian Russian writer, wrote, the dream of the socialist is not to get to heaven from earth. It's not to live a good life and sacrifice and be moral here in the hope of an eternal reward in the next life. That's the Christian promise, a promise that holds out hope of faith and that yet actually requires moral behavior in this world. The socialist argument is get rid of God, get rid of faith, argue that we are nothing but material creatures living in a material world, and therefore we need to turn this place into a heaven on earth. That's the utopian dream. And of course, the Greeks understood that this was not possible too. The heathen, the pagan Greeks understood this. The word utopia, literally utopos, means in Greek no place. And the Greeks understood thoroughly that these fantasies of heaven on earth were just that. They were never going to happen, given what human nature is. But having said that, and I think you segued into an important topic, the difference between classical liberal education and what we're getting today, social justice education. Well, the obvious distinction is that classical liberal education was dedicated to critical thinking. We exposed kids to all sorts of books, even books that we didn't like. I mean, I remember getting a classical education and being made to read the Communist Manifesto. But I read the Communist Manifesto alongside Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, alongside Plutarch's Lives of the Noble Greeks and Romans, alongside the Old Testament. And so classical education was tradition-based education. It was a way of looking back thousands and thousands of years across many different kinds of culture to find the best ideas, the best books, the best policies, the best political action, and to model it for kids, to show kids why virtue was better than vice, why morality was better than immorality, why truth mattered. And education was about the push toward truth. All of these things meant that you had a canon, that we valued history, that we were able to make comparative judgments between free market systems and what they do to people and fascistic regimes and what they do to people. We allowed kids to make their own minds up based on the kinds of historical information we had. That's been displaced, as I said, by social justice education, Marxist education. And if you remember what happened in the Soviet Union, what happened in communist China, what happened in Cuba, and even let's not forget what happened in Nazi Germany, because far too few people understand that the Nazis, they're considered some radical right-wing organization today, like a bunch of Christian conservatives. Nonsense. The Nazis were leftists. They were good men of the left. They were the National Socialist German Workers' Party, just a different permutation of socialism, a little bit different than what we saw in the Bolsheviks or what we saw in the communist Chinese. Nevertheless, very, very, very big socialists, liberal socialists. And so consequently, when we think about those movements and the way they educated their children, that's a forerunner of today's social justice education. They take kids away from parents. They divorce parents from their kids' education. They assume the role of parent in the classroom. The parents don't get to dictate what the kid's morality is. The parents don't get to dictate what the kid's religious worldview is. Parents no longer are responsible for teaching their kids sexuality and sexual morality. All this now is taken over by the schools, which then go on to feed your kids and provide clothing for your kids, even medical care in some instances for your kids. The state schools become surrogate parents. And then those children are not given a liberal education in the sense that they're exposed to many different ideas and taught how to think independently. No, under these Marxist socialist types of schools, they are handed ideology. They are, from a very early age, indoctrinated. They are hammered with one worldview. They are taught very early on to be intolerant and radically and hateful to traditional ideas or ideas that oppose the progressive narrative. And so we can see in the last 25 years how powerful this kind of teaching is. It's why so many kids, the Hitler Jugend, right? Why an entire generation of German kids became utter fanatics for the state ambitions of the fascists. Same thing happened in Italy with Mussolini, a generation of Italians. Multiple generations of Soviets, of Russians, had been dragged into this kind of education as well, where there is only the state. And I mentioned a moment ago truth. Classical liberal education is about trying to separate truth from falsehood, right from wrong, better from worse. In these quasi-Marxist forms of education, truth doesn't exist. There's only ideology. Truth and right and wrong and morality and virtue and beauty, these are all just bourgeois made-up social constructs. We reject them. And the only thing that exists in this Marxist kind of education is ideology and the Politburo, the truth of politics. So you are a good person today in American schools if you vote Democrat. If you're a middle school kid who hates Trump, you get all the perks of acceptance in today's government schools. But if you have the wrong ideas, if you're anti-abortion or you don't want to, you're a elementary school elementary school student who doesn't respond well to the teaching of sex in your sixth grade classroom, then there's something wrong with you. And so we are not encouraging kids anymore to buck the status quo. What we're encouraging them to do is to conform, and conform radically to the hyper-politicized left-wing classrooms that these Marxist educrats have transformed our kids' education into.
Yes, and you mentioned the difference between communism and fascism is a very thin line, and it's the difference between National Socialism and International Socialism. They're both really opposite sides of the same coin, but they are definitely the same coin. And one of the things that I think most people don't realize is that the reason that they are going after our youth, because they both recognized a long time ago that really that is the key to the future. If they can steal our youth, and they both said that. Stalin said that, Hitler said that, all of the socialists of every different type have always said that if they can take the education of our youth, and they can control the future. And that's exactly what they have planned for our public education system in this country.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, and we can see the fruits of that when you keep kids both ignorant and in fear of not conforming, when you transfer the molding and shaping power over little children to state entities and away from parental homes and local religious communities, this is always what you get. And I'm a university professor. It is absolutely the easiest thing in the world. If you understand what we've talked about for the past 20 minutes, the easiest thing in the world to figure out is why our college kids seem so stupid. I mean, we've all seen these man-on-the-street interviews, right, where some late-night talk show talking head sticks a microphone under some college kid's face at Harvard and says, okay, name the 3 branches of government, or name the vice president. Or these are kids going to hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of tuition for schools, right? Places like Harvard and the Ivy League, Stanford. And they can't answer basic questions about American history. They are utterly in the dark about American values or our constitutional founding documents. So we've trained them to be stupid, but ignorant, I guess, is a better word. And yet, despite the ignorance of these kids who've been in school all these years, they're also really, really, really angry. They're angry, and they are potentially violent, and they're disruptive. It's almost as if the less they know, the more radical their politics become. But isn't that also, if you think about it, the definition of what happened in Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union and communist Cuba? The more ignorant the revolutionaries were of economics and politics and history, the more they were willing to pull down, tear down, and destroy the foundations of civilization that gave them the freedom to be revolutionaries in the first place.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and that's why it's so important for them, because I think the United States, certainly 50 years ago, was at the very top of the world as far as our educational standards. And it's been a long haul, but they've been attacking our education for a very long time. Of course, we can go back to John Dewey, but it actually goes back much further than that. But maybe if you would talk about the basic philosophical tenets of education in America, and how they've been attacked by the progressives for literally 100 years or over 100 years.
Yeah, there's a reason we've heard that phrase again and again, the long march of socialism through our institutions. The leftist, anarchists, the socialists, the Marxists, they're playing a long game. One of the reasons why we're losing is the conservative, the Christians in this country, those who support our constitutional republic. We play a short game, right? A classic example is the election of Donald Trump. Now, I voted for Donald Trump. I think Donald Trump is doing actually a better job than I imagined he would. A number of victories already today. The Supreme Court just today sided with Donald Trump on the travel ban, which is astonishing when you think about it. Another case where religious liberty has been validated, the florist who refused to sell flowers for a gay wedding was validated today. The Supreme Court said to the state that tried to punish her, you go back and relook at that case now, because in light of what we said about what went on in Colorado, we're going to make you rethink this. So it has been remarkable, but let's be very clear. Donald Trump is not in any way, shape, or form a social conservative. Most of his career he's been a Democrat. He has aligned himself in liberal New York City with Democrat politicians. He needed to do that to be able to get through government and to get building permits passed. But what I'm trying to say is Donald Trump, for all his virtues, is not a traditional conservative. He has very left social leanings in many ways. He's still a better candidate than anybody else that's come down the road in a number of years. But we're redefining this now, aren't we? We're now beginning to argue that Trump, who is as right-wing as the country can stand, and a lot of young people believe that Trump is some uber-nationalistic right-winger. He is not that. And yet the media and our kids are beginning to believe he is. And so for me, you go all the way back to the foundation of American public schools, about 1850, 170 years ago. For the first almost 100 years of the American Republic, we had no public schools. The Founding Fathers understood, and if you look at all the founding documents, the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, you know the one word you'll never find in them? Education. The word education does not appear in any of those documents because the founders knew that the education is a personal, it's a family decision. It is not the decision the state makes. They understood that if the state was in control of the education of children, mandatory education of children, then the state would use those kids for their own nefarious purposes and not to the betterment of their local communities or their families. So 1850 rolls along, we get Horace Mann. Horace Mann is the founder of American public schools. When Horace Mann was looking around the world for a model on which to base his new American public school systems, he based it on the authoritarian 19th century Prussia model. And Prussia, of course, was a region of what is today Germany, very militaristic, kind of a nice precursor to what was going to happen with the Nazis. A very statist, militaristic, statist, top-down government where individual citizens had very little freedoms, where the state educated children to become warriors for the state. That's the system of education that was implemented in America in the 1850s, one based on authoritarianism and the privilege of the state to have complete control of our kids. You mentioned John Dewey. Within the lifespan of Horace Mann, when public schools got rolling, and actually Horace Mann actually made the statement that we consider your kids hostages. Once the American school system was up and rolling, he said that the American people we should look at the American people's children as having been taken hostage, he said, to our causes, Horace Mann. John Dewey wasn't just a communist, he was a card-carrying communist. He was a big supporter of the Bolshevik Revolution. He was in Russia to congratulate Vladimir Lenin on the takeover of the country. His sole mission, and the way he was deeply funded by people like the Rockefellers, John Dewey's entire mission was to bring socialism in the early 20th century, is to bring socialist and socialist ideas into American elementary and middle school classrooms. And if you jump forward to the 1980s, think about failed terrorist bomber of the Pentagon, Bill Ayers. Bill Ayers, the one career open to him after he was caught and drummed out of his radical associations, didn't go to jail for some reason, but after he was freed of his charges, he became a professor, Bill Ayers did, of elementary education. He trained thousands and thousands of elementary school teachers how to bring communist ideology into the first, second, and third grade classroom. And it shouldn't surprise you then that it was in Bill Ayers' living room that Barack Obama launched his presidential campaign. There's a whole long stand. And what did Obama do when he became president? He federalized education to a greater degree than all the presidents before him by overseeing the implementation of things like Common Core, which is that kind of dumbed-down, one-size-fits-all political education that we can trace back to Horace Mann, and that is the brainchild of Soviet and Nazi and Italian fascist educators.
Right, exactly. And we also know that with the shift in our education system under these people, you're right, all the big foundation money was behind that as well. And that, of course, that was exposed in the 1950s, but the big foundations were promoting a synthesis between communism and our system as early as really the 1920s. And that's, I don't think a lot of people realize just exactly how far back all this stuff goes. So it's taken them a lot of time to get to the point where they are right now. Oh, Dr. Pesta, we are moving into a commercial break. We'll pick this up on the other side of the break.
This is The Micro Effect.
The Micro Effect. www.themicroeffect.com.
And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence.
It was 1776 when the founders signed the writ of independence from the Brits.
Well, welcome back to Connecting the Dots with Dan Happel, and today our guest is Dr. Duke Pesta, and Dr. Pesta has been telling our listeners about public education and why it's so important that we make decisions of whether we want our kids educated in a socialist system or if we want them to have a truly free classical education system. I want to remind our listeners, please support this radio network. Your contributions are very much appreciated. Your support of our sponsors is very much appreciated. And I want to remind our listeners that we've got radio programs that are truly freedom-oriented, and these programs need your support. So please follow that. And Dr. Pesta, I wanted to read a couple of very quick quotes before we get back into the discussion, because your comments about how long this system has been under attack is absolutely spot on. And I want our listeners to realize how these things have been going on in our lifetime, at least the older members, our lifetime. First, I've got a quote by James Paul Warburg. His father, Paul Warburg, was one of the founders of the Federal Reserve. And this is a statement before the U.S. Senate, February 7th, 1950. Quote, "We shall have world government whether or not we like it. The only question is whether world government will be achieved by conquest or consent," unquote. And then I've got another one, and this is Rowan Gaither, the president of the Ford Foundation. This is 1954, and he is a Council on Foreign Relations was a Council of Foreign Relations member who at one time was the head of the Council on Foreign Relations for a short time, and that is, quote, "We operate here under directives that emanate from the White House. The substance of the directives under which we operate is that we shall use our grant-making power to alter life in the United States so that we can be comfortably merged with the Soviet Union," unquote. That gives a pretty good idea of how this system is embedded so deeply in our culture and in our country. And I want to give you the floor again to talk about just exactly how these folks have now, through Common Core and a number of other ways, how they have really implemented so many of the things that were talked about and kind of wild ideas, even 30, 40 years ago. Now they're commonplace in our culture and in our school systems.
Well, you know, it's a very complicated issue to trace how it happened and when it happened. I mean, those quotes that you could have taken quotes just like it from the 30s, 1930s, from high-ranking officials. You could have taken quotes just like it from the 1970s. You could have gone back to the 1880s and listened to people talk that way, progressives, New World Order types, globalists, Marxist, communists. It's the same thing again and again and again. And the more specific instance of this, I mean, there are certain bellwether moments. There are certain things you can point to and say, okay, that's a pivotal move in this movement to take us away from traditional education, learning-based education, education designed to help our kids succeed in life, to that kind of education, to this new quasi-Marxist ideological education. And I think one major bellwether moment was the creation of the Federal Department of Education. Under Jimmy Carter in 1979, we created this huge federal entity whose job it was to oversee education. So what we did is all the money that used to go directly from Congress to the states, education money, funding that went directly to states based on the population of that state, the population of children in that state. It wasn't really a political issue at all. Congress created budgets. Budgets were ratified by the Senate and then okayed by the president, and then money flowed from Congress, from the Treasury, to states to help with the public education scheme. Now, that was fairly apolitical. But once we created the Federal Department of Education, all the money that used to go directly to the states now had to go through first the Federal Department of Education. And at the Federal Department of Education, they decided what states, what schools got what money. And they, of course, used their power to bribe and coerce and blackmail. They had strings attached now for the first time. School districts that adopted liberal policies, or school districts that adopted Title IX or Title 10, all of these federal initiatives, they got more money. Students that didn't were ostracized. And so what ended up happening in 1979 is, for the first time, a government entity, a federal entity of the United States of America, had real control over shaping, with money, the policies and the way American schools were going to look. Again, go back to the Constitution. The Founding Fathers are rolling in their graves about the fact that you now have a federal Department of Education that oversees a federal public school system that American kids are mandated to attend at grave costs if they don't, and how the primary purpose of this education now has nothing to do with math achievement or making them better readers. It's all about, well, just look at the word common in Common Core. It's a staggering example of what the feds are up to. Raise your hand if you think your kids are common. Raise your hand if you think your kids are standard. They're not, but that's how the federal government of the United States is treating them. We will not treat your kids educationally as individuals. We will not try to allow your kid in school to succeed at what he or she is really good at, or to get help with what they're not good at. We are going to instead give your kids a common education. Every kid gets the same education. No one's allowed to move ahead. No one's jumping ahead anymore. We are not going to treat your kids in classrooms like individuals who have individual gifts and weaknesses. We are going to treat your kids like one kid. This, of course, is called outcome-based education, and it is pure and simple Marxism. It is the argument that it doesn't matter whether a kid can or can't do something, whether a kid wants to do it. It doesn't matter what a student's attitude or aptitudes are. It doesn't matter if the student has help at home or not. We're going to turn every student on the way out into the same, right? This is a hallmark of socialist thinking, that talented kids will be artificially held back if that's what it takes to bring equality. If low-performing kids can't be helped, we will pass the low-performing kids anyway, because they're no different than the ones who can succeed. And so you think about this, and that's social justice education, isn't it? You're not allowed to discipline kids in the schools. To provide discipline in the schools is to discriminate against them. And so we're really using our kids. The schools have become a petri dish, the public schools, for the incubation of all sorts of socialist nonsense among our younger generations.
Yes, and that petri dish, you mentioned Bill Ayers, and I don't know if you, at the Red Pill Expo, where you were a speaker, and finally did a fantastic job. I don't know if you heard Reverend Matthew Cummings do his presentation, but Matthew is a black minister who was in the Detroit school system in 1967, and his mother enrolled him in a supposedly new, wonderful educational opportunity called the Children's Community School. And when she enrolled him in that school, the principal of that school was none other than Bill Ayers. And his personal teacher who started him in education was none other than Diane Oughton, the lady who became the bomb maker for the Weather Underground and ended up blowing herself up in the process of doing work for Bill Ayers. The school system in Detroit was undergoing that metamorphosis, that transformation that early, and it certainly explains why the school system is so substandard in the Detroit area.
Well, and, without the dramatics of somebody blowing themselves up, this is now kind of what seemed unusual back in the 60s, right, to have a card-carrying member of the Weather Underground building bombs as with a side job as a public school teacher. Perhaps it's less radical now, but if you think about the teachers, the way teachers are trained, one of the big problems we have in this country that furthers this Marxist agenda is this idea that all elementary, middle, and high school teachers have to be trained at these big public universities in departments of education and college campuses. That's where they get a steady dose. All of that radicalness has now become mainstream pedagogy in education departments. Education departments, first of all, the idea that we have to license the state gets to license teachers is dangerous. If you've got a qualified accountant, somebody who's really good with numbers, there's no reason they should have to labor away at a big university to get a credential in teaching. With a simple class or two, they ought to be able to walk into a classroom and teach kids math. But no, the whole system has been hijacked by this really progressive, purely ideological accreditation system, which only really it filters out teachers who aren't willing to play the game. It filters out teachers who have different worldviews. It filters out teachers who see the classroom as anything other than, an incubatory factory for political ideas.
Well, and I think I have had personal contact with a number of teachers who they're always surprised when they learn that some of the elements behind their teachers' colleges are really embedded in Marxist ideology. And I have given out, I don't know how many copies of the book Fed Ed, talking about how the system has been corrupted and destroyed, but I've given out a lot of them. I'm thinking in the neighborhood of over 100 of them. And the comments that I get back every time is that we knew the system had changed and we knew that it was a lot different than what we had understood when we went into teaching. We just didn't understand why. So that's a kind of an important thing. We need to really be educating the educators on just exactly how deep this system is.
Well, it's a great idea. It's hard to do, though, isn't it? Because, and again, in order to get accredited, in order to get a license, in order to get hired, they have to be in these big government education programs. So, the vast majority of these young teachers who are just undergraduates, right, they get sucked into that world. They conform. I mean, kids conform. That's why kids, younger people, make such useful idiots for the left, because they're young and they don't have a lot of experience and they're conformist. And so this idea that, they go into these education programs, that they mean well. The young sophomore in high school wants to be a high school English teacher. She signs up for education classes and 60 credits in education later. It's all the same class. It's all the same class. It's all pure Marxism, the teaching pedagogy, the philosophy of teaching, the classroom management courses, all the multicultural garbage they get shoved down their throat in these university education programs. It's all just left-wing nonsense. But they conform to it because, it's all they know. They are never on these college campuses anymore exposed to right-wing ideas or conservative ideas or even capitalist free market ideas. They're being exposed again and again and again to the same kind of leftist ideology. It just seems to be normal to them. And now that our middle and high schools have been so corrupted by this left-wing garbage, kids are coming to college already prepared to receive left-wing Marxist teaching. They've already been groomed for it. And so they funnel right into these education programs where it's not about teaching, it's about politicizing and ideology and transforming kids into very different kinds of creatures. And so, some of the older teachers, like you said, they know things have changed, but they don't know it. But they don't know why. And even trying at that stage of life to get through to them, we've got to really, the big problem we have If we're going to keep the public schools, which we shouldn't have government education. We really ought not to have it. But it seems like it is such an irremediable now part of our DNA. The vast majority of parents I've talked to across the country, the thing they value most about government schools is the babysitting. Many moms realize their kids are getting a subpar education, that their kids are being exposed to bad ideas, but the main thing is that for 8 to 10 hours a day, mom and dad don't have to look after the kid, and so they're willing to sell their kid's future out for a little freedom.
Absolutely. And I have to tell you, Dr. Pesta, that is the part that is the most disheartening about this whole program, this whole idea, is that our parents, and of course I think we see this nationwide, it's kind of a natural trend in our country, that our whole country's become psychologically, intellectually, morally, culturally, I don't know, every aspect of our society has turned incredibly lazy and incredibly self-involved, and everything is about them. And you know, one of the most important parts of being a good parent is doing things that sacrificing yourself so that your kids can have a better future. And that has really changed since the 1960s. That is much different than it used to be.
Yeah, I think sacrifice is the key. I mean, remember in the previous segment, I talked about how the socialist idea is a materialist idea. It's the argument that human beings are just animals. We don't have a soul. There's no heaven. There's no hell. Religion is the opiate of the masses. There's nothing to. It's all just mythology. And I think that helps explain this, right? That if we have convinced generation after generation of young kids that they are just animals, that they don't have souls, there is no God, then socialism, in a context like that, it makes a perverse kind of sense, doesn't it? That all you have is what you've got, and so therefore, why sacrifice? Why sacrifice for future generations? Why sacrifice? Why have kids at all? Why are so many Western nations now reproducing at such a low rate that they can't sustain their populations? Italy and Japan, even in America. If it weren't for illegal immigration, what was a statistic in the news just the other day, Caucasian families in America are failing to reproduce at adequate numbers to reproduce themselves. And one of the reasons we're doing this in the West is because we have bought the lie of materialism. We've bought the lie that we are just animals. And if we're just animals, why have kids are a burden? Kids are expensive. Kids pull you away from your own dreams, your own fun, your own ability to spend money on yourself. And so if we believe that we are just here for a few short years, why waste it on kids? And so when we move from this shift, when religion, particularly Christianity, was forced out of the public arena, then it was turned into a great big joke, right? That Christians are foolish and silly, and now went from banishing Christianity to mocking Christianity to now openly antagonistically attacking Christianity. And I think there's a correlation there. Why are socialist ideals, put it this way, the more godless we become, the more socialistic ideas will seem appealing to kids who aren't educated.
Yes, and I know one of the comments that I've heard several times, and it's absolutely, I think, spot on, is that socialists love humanity. They just hate humans. And what they're doing is really destroying an entire generation, an entire culture, and this is a whole nother subject, but they're in the process of reducing population significantly, because that's part of their ultimate utopian dream, is to reduce the world's population to fewer than 1 billion people. Again, I don't want to get too far off into the weeds, so we'll let that one go right where it is. I want, Dr. Pesta, I want you to describe just exactly how badly the public schools are performing academically today, and why the system is intentionally designed to fail in every possible way. This is not an accident. It is an absolute must if they're going to get their system in place.
Well, you know, the performance is out there. You can't even hide it. There's no pretending anymore that our kids are actually getting a decent education. I mean, in Wisconsin, where I live, the schools in Wisconsin are regarded as quite good. We supposedly have a wonderful state educational system in Wisconsin, which is complete garbage. But the NAEP scores, the apolitical scores that measure student achievement, came out about a month ago. We know in Wisconsin that only 35% of 8th grade students can do math at an 8th grade level. So 65% of Wisconsin 8th graders cannot do 8th grade math. Only 37% of Wisconsin 8th graders read at an 8th grade level. So 63% of Wisconsin 8th graders cannot read at grade level. And when we say cannot read at grade level, that doesn't mean that they're all 7th grade readers. Many of them read at a 3rd or a 4th grade level. In the big cities like Milwaukee, we're talking about 18% of inner city kids can read and do math at the appropriate levels. And Wisconsin is as good as any other school. Very few states do it better, and many do it worse. And so when you look at every metric that we have to measure student achievement, our kids are radically behind where they ought to be, 2 and 3 and 4 years behind. And yet, just this year, how many times across the country in the last 6 months have teachers in these failing schools walked out during the school year to demand raises and get them? How much every year do we raise our real estate and property taxes to fund these public schools? And every year our kids' performance gets worse and worse and worse. It's a broken system, but it's not a hard one to understand. If you are looking at the public schools and expecting reading, writing, and arithmetic, and expecting from the public schools that an 8th grader reads at an 8th grade level and an 11th grader reads at an 11th grade level, well, you're reading it wrong. That's not what the schools are set up for. You're angry, but you are misunderstanding what the American schools have become. The reason they're failing our kids educationally, because the primary purpose of education isn't grades. It's not academic achievement anymore. It's to teach them about global warming, to turn them into environmentalists, to make them social justice warriors for feminist and racial causes. It's about making them good little receptive Marxists who anti-capitalist, anti-corporate people. This is what the schools are about. Anti-bullying programs that are really nothing more than procurement agencies for homosexual and transgender activists. This is what the primary purpose of the schools is about. It's about social engineering. It's not really primarily about educating your kids.
No, you're right. And I had personal experience of what you were talking about in Tucson. We winter in Arizona, and my wife and I do, and the Tucson school system was out on strike, and they actually were enlisting the students to come and stand on street corners and protest and wear their T-shirts. And I found that it was really interesting because their slogan was "Red for Ed," and they were wearing these red T-shirts, and I thought, boy, that's pretty appropriate.
Well, and the idea that you are going to incorporate a 6 or an 8 or an 11-year-old who has no idea the politics of the situation, you're going to basically use your kids as metaphorical human shields to demand a raise. The very same kids you're failing class after class after class, right? And what was the response of the state governments? As far as I know, every teachers union strike got more money. Every group of teachers who walked out got paid more money, got raises. And in Oklahoma, they were given significant raises, and they demanded more. They said it wasn't enough. And yet, where is the accountability in terms of making sure for all that extra money, kids can actually, read and write, but they can't. That's not what they're interested in.
Right. And in Arizona, incidentally, the increase they were talking was 20%, and they thought it wasn't enough.
Right.
And when they did a breakdown of it, under contract in Arizona, they're only allowed to teach 26 weeks a year, and teachers are not allowed to they're not supposed to anyway teach more than 32.5 hours per week. So when you break that down and compare that to a regular job, they would be making, if they were working 50 weeks a year like most people, they'd be making somewhere around $85,000 to $90,000 a year.
That's right.
Dr. Pesta, please stay on. I hope you can stay on with us a little longer because we've got a commercial break. I want to talk about your project, about Freedom Project Academy.
Sounds good.
This is the Micro Effect.
The Micro Effect. www.themicroeffect.com.
You take the blue pill. The story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
There was a mighty nation, blessed above all of creation. It was a rare and precious pearl, conceived in faith and liberty, home of the brave, land of the free. It was the envy of the world. But this shining city on a hill has turned from the Creator's will and let evil take control. Now the reckless men who lead them want to strip away their freedom and to steal their very soul. Now it's smoke and mirrors, switching bait, criticize and confiscate and let the guilty walk away. In this once righteous, godly nation, in the halls of education, they forbid a child to pray. They say we need to spread the wealth. They pretend to guard the health of the feeble and the poor, while the hand they hold behind their back confuses and conceals the fact that the wolf is at the door. There's an unseen hand that pulls the string.
Well, welcome back to Connecting the Dots with Dan Happel, and today we've got Dr. Duke Pesta on the program, and he's talking about our modern education system and just exactly what has happened to our system. And we've gone through quite a bit of history here, but we are now at a point where I want to really talk about how the system that you are bringing into effect, homeschooling, an education system that is based on all the classical education precepts of knowledge, of critical thinking, of learning that our foundational elements in this country are based on very strong Christian values and a number of other things. That is the basis of your program, and I want people to understand just how important it is for parents all over this country to understand how important the future of their children is to this country as well as to them. And Dr. Pesta, I want you to talk about your Freedom Project Academy and the new opportunities for concerned parents to homeschool their children in your system.
Well, there are a lot of parents who understand the need to do something different, who would love to find a way to educate their kids outside the public system, but they don't think they can do it. They don't think they have the time, or they don't think that they're qualified to teach their kids, or they have the patience to do so. We've created a system that allows for the best of both worlds. We bring live teachers into the living room right through the computer screen. The kids are in real-time classes. They have classmates from kids all over the country and in 14 different foreign countries, too. So they're in virtual classrooms with kids their age. Teachers are able to call on them and to have the kids participate in class learning together. We give rigorous education, homework assignments. We do all the grading. So parents, and the nice thing about our system is it is live. And so we have kids log in live, participate in live class like they would in a brick-and-mortar school. But the minute the class is over, it's immediately uploaded. So a mom and dad who do work, they can watch, if they have time and the inclination, they have the ability to watch every single moment that their kids are in school, every single thing that happens in their kids' classroom at any time over the course of a school year. If for any reason they need to go back to a class and see it, they can do that. And it's a wonderful way to empower teachers, too. As the progressives take over more and more of public schooling, less and less is actually coming home. Teachers are allowed to see, are sending home less and less of their assignments. Kids are bringing home less and less of their work. So parents are really in their dark a lot of ways about what goes on in their kids' classroom. But with our system, they get to participate and see every aspect of what we do. We want to partner with parents. We don't want to displace them. One of the big problems and crises we have in this country is that parents have basically ceded education away from themselves. They're letting strangers do it. It frees them up to work or do other things. They don't pay much attention to what goes on in their kids' classrooms. We want to try to reinstate a system where it's mom and dad who's aware of everything that's going on, and they have a good say in it.
Well, I think that's really important, and I think the fact that virtual education, or certainly brick-and-mortar schools, we look at these huge edifices of what I would call intolerance and ignorance that are costing taxpayers billions and billions of dollars every year to keep them going. And in fact, I think the future of education, no doubt about it, will be through virtual media, through the internet, through things that allow kids to more and take less time in doing it. I know that that is really what's behind this effort, and I think it's a fantastic idea.
Well, thank you. And we've been around for 8 years now, and we seem to grow every year a little bit. We get more students, and we perfect the system. There's only about a month of enrollment left, so we still have a good 30 days left where parents, if they're interested, can consider enrolling for fall 2018 classes. The easiest way to do that is to visit us at our website. We are Freedom Project Academy. That's the name of the school. And you can access all of our free information at fpeusa.org. That's fpeusa.org. And at that site, you can find numbers to call us if you want to talk to us directly, or you can see sample classrooms, how they work. All the information is there. We also publish online free our entire lesson plan. So you can see every book that your kids would be reading at any grade level, from kindergarten through high school, to get a sense of what we do. You have we're very transparent. We want you to know that the kind of classical Christian education your kids are going to get is you are in control of it, and you see everything that we do all the time. So easiest thing to do when you've got 30 days to think about it still, if this is something that sounds good to you, a way of and it's not just giving your kids a better education, it's protecting your kids from all the things that go on in the public schools, from the bullying to the drugs to the sexualization to the fact that these school shootings. I mean, you think about Parkland. The one thing Parkland teaches us is that the schools can't protect your kids. The kid who shot up Parkland, the FBI had visited this kid's family twice. 39 different times the local Florida police visited this kid and his family. The school itself knew he was a problem. Everybody knew, and yet no one could protect those kids. You can blame the NRA all you want, but the fact is that the NRA wasn't taxed with protecting those kids. And all those organizations, the school administrators, the FBI, the local police, they could not get the job done. So Freedom Project allows you to have your kids in the safety of the home and away from all those negative influences as well.
Well, and also, part of your program allows parents, and this is something I'd like to explore a little bit. If there is one parent, let's say we have one parent that is homeschooling their kids, this is an opportunity for other parents to utilize that, work out an arrangement with that parent where their kids can be getting an education that way if they can't be at home with their kids. They can share those resources. They can work together, and they can make this work for them. Am I right with that?
Yeah, absolutely. We partner with churches. There's a lot of great churches in this country that are busy on the weekends but empty all week long. We are able to bring, through the power of technology, we can bring a full school on the computer into a church rec room, and you can educate 6, 10, 12 kids at a time. We have moms and dads that have co-ops in various neighborhoods, 8 or 10 families in one neighborhood in a big city. They'll just alternate. 1 week the kids will be at one mom's house, and after 12 weeks, it rotates around, and for a week, these kids, 6 and 8 and 10 kids, are learning in different environments, and they're all getting a good education. A way to protect kids in every possible way, and to make the parents primarily the primary stakeholders of their kids' education.
Mm-hmm. And let's talk about cost, because traditional education in this country now is almost through the roof. And yet, look at how poorly the kids are performing on testing and so forth. Your project, your Freedom Project Academy, talk about what your costs are in comparison with the traditional school system.
Well, a lot of people like to think that public schools are free. They're not. I mean, we're spending anywhere between $14,000 and $17,000 a year on every single school kid, and that all comes from our taxes. Freedom Project Academy, for a full year of schooling, that's every class for a full year, 9 months of schooling, that includes all grading and testing and all that stuff, is about $2,200, which comes down to a very little bit of money every day. It's the cheapest program out there. We see ourselves really primarily as a missionary organization. We want to bring quality education at an affordable way, and so we're at least half as expensive as any other major program you're going to find, and we actually have real teachers as opposed to just recorded lessons. So, and on top of that, for families who are a little bit financially down, we have a tuition assistance program. So if you just think you want to come to Freedom Project, you're certainly welcome to apply for tuition aid as well. We have a pool of money at which we can use to help parents offset some of the costs if they need to.
Well, this is, it's a brilliant plan. I mean, it really is. And the idea that you can get that much better education in a system like this for literally a fraction of the money, I think it's pretty clear what the future of America should be. The problem is that we've got the traditional school system out there really hanging over our head, and they've got all the propaganda on their side. What can parents do to fight back against that system? If they reduce that system to what it should be, which is virtually non-existent, well, it is non-existent, could save an awful lot of money. We could save a lot of money for this country. Tell our listeners what they can do to maybe help accelerate that destruction of the public school system.
Well, I mean, the only real thing you can do is like any big bloated federal bureaucracy. It's not going away voluntarily. The only thing you can do is pull your kids out. Now, if enough American families pulled their kids out, the schools would either have to, public schools would either have to reform themselves or go away. We're nowhere near that. And I would say, to the mom and dad out there, I mean, your first priority is not to fixing education. The first priority is to your kids and grandkids. The best thing you can do for your kids and grandkids is make sure they get a quality education. They will not get that in the public schools. So, and if enough parents did that, eventually you could force a change, right? If parent after parent after parent after parent decided to look after their kids first and not just simply mindlessly send them off to these public schools, then you would send a message to the school people that would be a powerful one. But again, I mean, people get burnt out. If this is a huge problem, and people freak out. How can I, as one person, do anything at all about this? If you think about it that way, you'll never do anything. Just focus on giving your kids the best education. And it should be obvious now that they won't get that best education in the American government school system.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree with that, certainly. Now, I know you need to leave the show here at some point, but I want to ask you one question is in my mind, and that is, what are some of the class options? I know a lot kids are expecting a lot out of any school system as far as options, different classes, the kinds of unique training classes that are available in your school system. Talk about that.
Well, yeah, and I'll hop off after this, but we do have a wide range of courses. We teach economics to kids at every grade level. We teach classical languages like Latin as well as modern languages. We have a wide range of science and math courses. For kids who don't think they want to be math career-based in college, we have a wonderful consumer math course that teaches kids about banking and finance and mortgage rates. And so we even have math classes that prepare kids for day-to-day life. We have science classes, not just for traditional grades, but advanced. We have advanced biology, not just biology. We have a really wonderful physics class for advanced science kids and astronomy. So we have a really wide range of classes. Our history classes are very diverse and very, very balanced. We teach actual history without the left-wing political spin, so that's important as well. So lots of different options for moms. And Mom and Dad, you don't have to take a whole year with us. You don't have to take a whole year's worth of classes. We sell individual classes, too. So if you're pretty happy with your kids' education, but you just want to augment their history or math, you can just take one of our math classes if you like.
Well, and I know that a decorated, I guess that's the best term, school teacher who wrote a book describing how bad the education system is, and that's John Taylor Gatto, wrote a book about education that described how most kids, if they followed a classic education curriculum, they could learn more in a few hours with a classical education system than they could even begin to learn in a week in a traditional school system because of the poor quality of the education. So, Dr. Pesta, I want to thank you for being our guest. You've really given us a great idea of just exactly what Freedom Project Academy is about and why we need to get our kids out of the public education system. And I look forward to the next time we get a chance to visit. And incidentally, you were brilliant at the Red Pill Expo in Spokane this last weekend. Okay, we're going to move on to the next subject, and that is the Red Pill Expo. We had an event in Spokane, Washington. We've been advertising on this program for some time, and this last weekend, this last Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, we had the Red Pill Expo, and it turned out incredibly well, and it turned out to be just a powerhouse program. And the person that I've got on the line to visit with me now about that is our event planner and really the brains behind so much of the activities that made this event really a brilliant event, and that is Debbie Boscalupi. And Debbie happens to be the show.
Hello?
There was a mighty nation, blessed above all of creation. It was a rare and precious pearl, conceived in faith and liberty, home of the brave, land of the free. It was the envy of the world. But this shining city on a hill has turned from the Creator's will and let evil take control. Now the reckless men who lead them want to strip away their freedom and to steal their very soul. Now it's smoke and mirrors, switching away. In this once righteous, godly nation, in the halls of education, they forbid a child to pray. They say we need to spread the wealth. They pretend to guard the health of the feeble and the poor, while the hand they hold behind their backs confuses and conceals the fact that the wolf is at the door. There's an unseen hand that pulls string. It makes his little puppets dance to every song he sings as the night rolls in on a rising tide. Look beyond the shadows, behold a pale horse ride. They claim to speak a new world.
Okay, it sounds like we're back on. I apologize to our listeners if we had a technical problem here. It sounds like we're back on. In any case, Debbie Boscalupi is going to be our guest for this final 40 minutes of the show, and we are going to be talking about the Red Pill Expo that just happened this past weekend in Spokane, Washington. Dr. Duke Pesta was one of our speakers, and it was absolutely brilliant. We had 30 some speakers at the event, and virtually every single one of them were just knocked the ball out of the park. And Debbie is the event planner for this program for the Red Pill Expo, and she is also a radio show host on Radioactive Wednesday tomorrow morning at the same time as the Connecting the Dots show is on Tuesday. So with that, Debbie, are you on the call? Well, it sounds like Debbie's not on the call now. She was on earlier, and we'll try to get her back on. Hopefully that will happen very shortly. But this Red Pill Expo that we had in Spokane was a real success, and it was a success because people literally came here from all over the country, and they also came in from other countries around the world. It was that important an event, and we had a lot of fun because it was a lot of reinforcing of the fact that we as citizens and we as patriots, there are a lot of people around the world that feel just like we do. And it was an event that allowed those people to come together in a way that we could learn and we could support each other and we could grow as intellectually, grow as patriots. And that was something that is very, very unique in the world. Certainly that number of people is really a phenomenal thing. So with that, Debbie, are you on the call yet? Sounds like Debbie dropped off the call. I will try to get her back on the call. In any case, Debbie will certainly flesh out some of the things that we did there, and we will make sure that our listeners get a chance to see the inside, let's say, how the sausage is made at the Red Pill Expo. But we had speakers from all over the world. We had Lord Christopher Monckton there. We had Trevor Loudon, who is from New Zealand. He was there. We had Harry Buyens, who is from Canada. He was there. We had literally a guest of, or a list of speakers that any one of these speakers would draw an enormous crowd anywhere. Certainly having 30 plus of these speakers at an event in a single location is something that just doesn't happen. And we had such an amazing group of people. I am not sure how we could possibly do any better than what we did. And so we had a program, a an event that was really absolutely amazing, and that brought in people from everywhere to see this event, to be part of this event, and to understand what a great program it was. You really needed to be there. So we're building on the next Red Pill Expo, and that's why we were going to discuss the one that we just had. We had one a year ago in Bozeman, Montana, and that was our first Red Pill Expo, and it was a blowout success. And as a result, we did the second Red Pill Expo in Spokane, Washington, and it was an amazing success as well. So now we're trying to start planning for the third Red Pill Expo, which we believe will be a worldwide event, or an event that will be a worldwide, let's say, annual event that will draw people from all over the world. So that is what we are trying to do with this. I will, Joe, let's take our break right now, and I'm going to try to get Debbie back on the radio call, and we'll be back shortly for our listeners.
Line now.
Oh, okay, wonderful. All
Hi,
right.
Dan.
I was just texting her to see where she was. So, okay, Debbie, I've done about all the ad-libbing I can do here. So I was definitely ready for you. We'll be going into a break shortly, but let's start talking about what a fantastic event we had in Spokane, Washington over this past weekend.
Oh my gosh, it was phenomenal. And I think, Dan, what made it so over the top phenomenal, where we are getting results that same conference ever, like we did last year, but people from last year are now saying this was the best conference ever. Speakers like Chris Ann Hall, who speak, Dan, she speaks some 200 plus days a year. So, and sometimes multiple times a day. She gets invited to all sorts of conferences as a keynote speaker. And even given that some speakers who normally speak from an hour to 3 hours to reduce their speaking time in the planning stages. So a couple months ago, their speaking times kept getting shortened all the way down to some of them 15 minutes, like Jesse Lee Peterson was only 15 minutes. And for the days of travel, said best conference. I go to many conferences. This was just at the top. Chris Ann Hall said in over 8 years of all the speaking engagements that she does, that she's going to, that this was the best one that she's been to in over 8 years. So when you have that top caliber of speaker in our freedom and liberty movement, who I think are the best speakers out there, one, they're not only dynamic, Dan, but they're telling the truth. And they truly care that we all have the truth, and they know what we're up against. And for them to say all of that, to me, Dan, we did another 2 years in a row. Our team did a great job, and I'm not, I'm just tickled. I'm so tickled and thrilled because there's a lot of things that could go wrong and a lot of things that do go wrong, but obviously we do such a great job as a team that most people don't notice, the little things that happen. And so I'm just, year number 2, we've got it under our belt. This one was a big one. It was in a new location with very little contact. Last year, Dan, because of your contacts, and in Bozeman, Montana, it was, even though it was our first one and very difficult, it was a little less challenging in many ways because of your connections. And also the expense was, several $1,000s less expensive than this year. So overall cost. So, I'm still on cloud 9 getting messages. I just got a call from Lord Christopher Monckton saying, I hope you have me back. It was another great conference. I took Ed out to dinner to tell him thank you. And we know he goes to all sorts of conferences, from United Nations conferences to even like Heritage Foundation and many Washington, D.C. conferences. So, Dan, you know, if I had a beer mug right now, and you were sitting across the table from me, I would say, heads up, Dan, and cheers, buddy.
I agree. You know, it was a team effort, but you were right there in the trenches from day one, really pulling all the things together that made this conference great. And I think people don't realize just exactly how much work you put into an event like this. Certainly those of us who, I was involved very definitely, and I was working hard, but I think people don't realize just exactly how hard you work as an event planner, because you were there months and months ago putting together all the little details that really make a conference like this work. And it was a team effort, but certainly if there was a horse that was a lead horse on this, pulling the wagon, you were it.
Well, thank you, Dan. And you know, I just love doing events. I do. And people see me running around and saying, do you need help? And it just, and I appreciate it. And I just, you know, I don't know what, thank you. And I have to tell you that it is just a passion of mine to put these things together. I wish I could do it more. I wish we did more events. Big ones, not a lot of little ones, because you know, Dan, the little ones, and I'm sure everybody out there, the little ones, the little events take, you know, not as much work, but just enough. And if you're going to do something, if you're going to put a lot of time and effort and your own personal finances, which we all did as a team, you know, thousands of dollars between all of us, and thousands of, you know, hours over the last couple of years. You know, it just takes a dedication that that you're going to do this no matter what. You know, that nothing's going to stop it. Nothing's going to stop the event. Nothing's going to stop the success. And if you're going to do something, why not do it great? And that's my mentality is on all the events I do. If I'm going to do something, it's going to be great. And we got a speaker, a brand new speaker, Gary Galeno. He's a millennial, and we love that because we love bringing on new speakers and younger speakers. And Gary Galeno, Grindall61 on YouTube, he's phenomenal. Grindall61 is his YouTube name, and I met him a couple years ago. And when the first time I met Gary, I knew about him because he's in Southern California, and he is working hard to stop regionalism. How does he do that? He takes his little camera. At that time, it was a smartphone, and he started going to city council meetings and was listening to the bull that the elected officials were saying, and then he'd see a newspaper article, and he'd say, wait a minute, that's not what they said yesterday. So he started catching on to that, you know, we are being lied to by our elected officials. So he started taking his smartphone and started doing YouTube videos. And he pounds them out many, many times a day. Some, you know, you can look through at his Grindall61 YouTube channel, and you can see thousands of videos. And he's got, you know, something like in the millions of viewers, or hits, rather. I don't know how many viewers he has, like 56,000 viewers, but over 2 million hits, let's say. I'm not sure about the number. But anyway, and when I first met Gary at this rinky-dink restaurant with a couple of friends of mine, Dan Titus and Michael Hoskinson, he was shy, and he even describes himself today as introverted, really introverted. So, and in the planning process of this conference, we do this affiliate program, and that Dan and Ed and Pat and the organizing committee said, you know what, let's do this affiliate program. It helps, you know, people brand us, and it contributes back to those who actually get people to register for this conference. Well, Gary was one of those, and he said to me, Debbie, you know, it was kind of like Debbie Downer. If there was a name for Gary, it would be Debbie Downer Gary. I don't know. But Gary was it was just a struggle for him. In fact, he wasn't even like thrilled about this conference. He was kind of thrilled, and all the way up to the end. And what he said to me on day 2 was, Debbie, if you told me how great this event was going to be, I could have gotten people here. And so that to me was like, and then so he's networking, and he called me yesterday his mother signed up for live streaming, paid the full price. His father paid the full price ticket to be there actually in person, only to hear Gary speak. So he got there 2 hours early and heard Gary speak and then had to leave. And I asked Gary if it was worth it to his parents, and he said, oh my gosh, yes, it was so worth it. In fact, you know, next year, they're already talking about next year, but Gary said to me, Debbie, this exceeded my expectations. And then he started going, and this is what we should do next year. So Gary says, this is what we should do, not you and me, Dan, but we should do, or you and I, we should do next year, meaning now he wants to be a part of this. And so that is, enormous credibility that we have built now 2 years in a row. And it's very exciting. We have speakers who say, you saw Reverend Matthew Cummings, who was just powerful on stage. Man, what a neat man. And he was saying, if I'm invited back, he was saying this as he was speaking, if I'm invited back, and that is just extraordinary testimony. Every speaker wants to come back, and you don't get that at most conferences. You get, speakers, me being one, Dan, you being one. Yeah, maybe I will. If they invite me, maybe. But these speakers are Dr. Siegel, Marlene Siegel, a vet who we invited to speak. She said, Debbie, I already know what my talk is for next year.
That's funny. One of the things that we kind of really try to emphasize with the Red Pill Expo, and I'm not sure that our listeners really fully understand how much networking we do, how important it is to attend one of these events so that you can meet with all these brilliant people who are right there with you, and I'm talking our speakers and our guests. And an opportunity to exchange addresses, to exchange cards, to exchange information, and really bring the freedom movement together in a way that this can't happen in almost any other scenario in the same dynamic way.
You're right, and thank you for reminding me. Gary Galino said, Grindall 61 said, one of the things that bothered him about this conference, if I may, is that, well, first of all, he said the networking was incredible. He said the networking was incredible. And he said, I had no idea that all these speakers were so accessible. He said, I expected speakers to come in, do their thing, and leave. And I said, Gary, that is exactly why we designed the Red Pill Expo. Very, very different from any other conference out there. This is exactly why we designed the Red Pill Expo to be in one room. And that it is over a series of days where we have events where we say the speakers will be there. And Gary said, I had no idea I'd be able to go up and talk to Del Bigtree, or I had no idea that I'd be able to just go up to, hey, Chrisanne, as she's walking around the room. And so what we do, how we've designed this, is that the big stage, we did this last year at Bozeman too, we like to have everything in one room. The exhibit space is in the same room as where the talks are going on. Normally, at a conference, you have breakout rooms, and we've thought about that idea. Do we want to do it? And we understand that when you have breakouts, it means you pull lots of people out of the room where the main stage is. And it starts to break up the group. It starts to break up the conference. It starts to break up the dialogue where we're not all having the same conversation. At the Red Pill Expo, which we've set ourselves apart from any other conference out there, there is one conversation going on, and that is the red pill. and which is reality, and it's all happening in the same room. If you want to go out, you're more than welcome and have an outside conversation. But the action is where in the main room, and people want to be there. They don't want to go off and have a lecture with speaker Del Bigtree, or Del Bigtree's, for example, table is outside the room. So when Del Bigtree gets off the stage talking about Vaxxed and his movie Vaxxed and vaccinations, he's such a powerful speaker that when he gets off the stage and he wants to sell books and he wants to sell t-shirts, because most of our speakers are, they don't get paid, but how they get payment is they sell their books, they sell their items. Jeanette Finicum selling films for Lavoie. But if we had their exhibit tables outside the room, could you imagine all the people after a powerful speaker like Dow who want to race out the room to get his signature, to shake his hands, to buy whatever he has? We decided as a team, having gone to many conferences, that we don't want that. We respect the next speaker. We want everybody to hear the next speaker. And we also want our speakers to hear the next speaker. And so anyway, it's a really, Dan, there was another testimony that we got from the convention center. First of all, they said, will you please come back next year? So that's awesome. They loved our event, that they want us back next year. But I can tell you guys, we're not going back to Spokane next year already. I think Dan will agree. Not because anything went wrong, but we like to mix it up. We like to think out of the box. We are different. We have separated ourselves from any other conference, and we're going to continue to do that. But the convention center said to me, the caterer as well as the convention services manager, and this is a huge convention space, huge. And they have hundreds of conventions a year. From when I was there last time, Dan, doing the site inspection, there was a big RV, recreational vehicle conference. When we were there, there was a taekwondo or some kind of, judo or something like that going on. And so what the convention services and caterer manager, who do hundreds of events every year, said, you have given us a new idea as how to sell our event space. So I think it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it is awesome, Debbie. And one of the things that I want to emphasize is the fact that we had a really large group of exhibitors there. And the comments that I got back from the exhibitors who went there because they had a product or an idea that they wanted to make money with, they wanted to be at our event, and they all indicated that they had a great time. They did very well in their sales on their products, and they liked the idea that they could be in the room with the event as it was going on, so they could hear all the speakers, even if they were at a table, selling products. They could still hear the program, and they felt like they were, part of the family, let's say. That's a big deal.
It is a big deal, and here's the challenge with that for those who are thinking, okay, and if you want an idea of the concept, you're interested in having a conference like that, you can contact us, and we're happy to help. Because really, Dan, there is no other conference like this. It's pretty phenomenal. But the worst thing is that you're going to have me, or hopefully next year a volunteer going around with a sign saying quiet. Just keep the conversation down. That's all we ask. You can continue, even if Ed Griffin is up on stage speaking, you can still be doing business, but just recognize that there is a speaker, and as your voice raises, it does start to impact what goes on stage. So we just asked that the exhibitors try and keep it down as much as possible. And this year we had to do that. We grabbed our quiet signs. We made handmade quiet signs, and we're going around. And at first they were offended, but then they got it. And so,
and
there's
it
a lot of
worked
things
well.
that we could do for next.
There's something else I want to talk about, and that is the security. We had, and I want to recognize these people, we had the Eastern Washington organized militia was part of our security team at this event, and everything went so well. We had no real disruptions. We had a few people in there that were boneheads, but you're going to have those in any event. But really, we had no disruptions that caused any real problems at the event. And so for our listeners, if you're concerned about coming to an event like this because you're afraid that there are going to be protesters there and all these people that are going to cause problems, don't feel that way. We had an article that met us before we got there. In fact, the newspaper editor had called me and talked to me on the phone and interviewed me on the phone, and actually he quoted me exactly right. But then, because he couldn't get some of the other organizers and speakers on the phone, where did he go? He went to the Southern Poverty Law Center to ask their opinion of what we were doing. And of course, needless to say, it was a total smear job. Everything they talked about was the opposite of what was really happening there. And as a result of that, several of the speakers had contacted the paper and just mentioned how totally false some of these statements were. And for the remainder of the weekend, they reported on us pretty well. I mean, they did a pretty good job, and things kind of turned around.
Yeah,
the other side is always lying, and they're always trying to paint us as something that we're not. And Debbie, one of the things that came out of this conference was what a great group of patriotic, truly freedom-loving Americans we have in this country.
No doubt. And Dan, I have a new name for Southern Poverty Law Center, who I have been a hit piece. They've called me a failed politician. They've called me an anti-Indian bigot. They did a video. They have a video of me on their website when I'm talking about the Klamath River dams and what a conspiracy theorist I am. And I have a new name for them, Dan. I hope you like it. Southern Puberty Law Center.
Well, and according to Alex Newman, it's the Soviet, so we could add that to it, Soviet Puberty Law Center.
You know what? That just goes to show we can have fun with it. And, it was really an honor. Even though they wrote that horrible article, they did it to us last year. It is an honor when such a powerful, and unfortunately they are powerful, wealthy, and they are wealthy. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars in their coffers to pay their many attorneys. And I think they're funded by George Soros and other mean-spirited people. And so it is an honor to have such a powerful, evil group against us. It just shows that we're on the right path for truth and honor. And, Dan, for the non-patriots, and when I say patriot, and I know you mean people who are in this, in this fight for freedom, liberty, which includes honor, integrity, truth, God-given natural rights, not anti-government. We are actually pro-government. We believe that government is necessary, that, but it's bad people and mean-spirited, greedy people in government who have really, really harmed what government is supposed to be about, which Ed would like to say is a protectorate, and I agree with him. He'd like to see the name move to protectorate, but I wouldn't. I like the name government. That's what it is, and it's the bad people in government who are not protecting the citizens, who are protecting themselves, or are anti-human humans who are greedy, and as you said earlier to Dr. Duke Pesta, they are humanists, but anti-human, or they hate humans, but they're supposed humanists. And so really is fun to have these articles come out. The next article that they printed, that the paper printed, was about Lavoie Finicum, and I went to a showing last night. I didn't get to see the film on Thursday night because we were so busy getting the details of the conference, and people were, online, and Dan and I, you guys, it was just, I wish somebody videotaped us, Dan, because you and I were running around putting pieces together and at the same time answering the phone for all the live streaming calls that we were getting. We did not live stream, even though it said it on the schedule, we were not live streaming the film of Lavoie. So people were calling and saying, how do I get in? And people were registering because they heard about the event last minute. And so Dan and I were going around, finding each other. Okay, did you take care of that? Oh, this over there. It was just a blast. It was just a blast. But one of the positive things that came out was the next day. So last night I did see the showing of the first of the film in the series of Govern versus, I can't remember the series name right now, put on by the Center for Self-Governance. And so I finally got to watch the documentary last night, the first one. And it leaves with kind of a cliffhanger. So you want this next film, but they're still working on it. Anyway, what came out was a really positive article from the same newspaper that called the Soviet Puberty Law Center. And but this article was favorable, and I guess the writer was in the audience watching the film, and so the Finicum family is very, very pleased at what came out from that documentary.
Yes,
from the documentary
it was funny because I got the editor of the paper to actually come to the forum there, to the foyer, I guess, of the convention center, and he was actually standing there. I got passes for him and photographers and also for other news writers. And when he was there, we really held him accountable for the fact that he had brought the Southern Poverty Law Center into the discussion. And I asked him, I says, why did you do that? He said, well, we couldn't get any of the other people to respond except you. And actually, he wrote exactly what I quoted, and I was very pleased with what he put in as far as what I quoted, because he did get it accurate. But, that shows you how these newspapers, who in the world would use a resource like the Southern Poverty Law Center, except most of these newspapers are biased to this kind of a natural leftist viewpoint. And so I was pleased, too, Debbie, with the way they turned around. They were actually at our event and saw the nature of the people there and what we were talking about. And you could see a very obvious change in the way they were reporting.
Yeah, very, very much so. And I think that we may have averted another bad press event. There were some agitators who showed up, and so this is something that I'm really just coming to, not just coming to, but that I am on, oh gosh, how do I say this? Here's what happened, and I don't know how to quite put this in words. I was the baby of the family, and remember, the only way that we could communicate was whine and scream. So it takes me a little bit more to communicate, and I'm working on that, Dan. I'm working on it. But anyway, what I felt agitators showed up. They paid cash. They didn't give us their full names at first, and so we were suspicious of these nice-looking boys. We were excited they were on the younger side. Must have been in the early 20s. But their stories started just there was that feeling something's not right here. So we gave them a deal because they were younger, which we liked. We encourage younger people to show up. And they bought 3 full tickets, and we gave them 2 guest tickets, which wasn't out of the ordinary. We had already given full-paying tickets, guest tickets, so it's not like they didn't get a special deal, but we told them that they got a special deal. It is a special deal. And so they started telling us, yeah, we're going to mix around, one day this person's going to be there. And we're like, well, we're not, that's not, these are non-transferable, but okay, we'll work with you on that. We really want, we want to see you here. And they called me up and said, why didn't we hear about this event? We live in the area and we didn't hear about it until just recently when that article came out that called you guys alt-right. Well, anyway, they showed up and we started to question who they were, and come to find out that at least one of the guys who showed up on the last day was an agitator and has been showing up at freedom-loving events and causing a ruckus, which then he makes it in the newspaper, but it's always tied with some white supremacist KKK angle. And so we are very, as a committee, as a team, watchful of who is attending, although it's open to anyone. In fact, we encourage anyone to come, because once you're there, you're going to hear the truth, and it's an opportunity to go, wait a minute, I was told, that vaccinations are really good, but when you see Del Bigtree's data, you're like, oh my gosh, I have a grandchild just born. Oh, I need to get to my grandchild before anything else happens. I need to get to my daughter and tell. Anyway, so we encourage people to be there, but we are also very, very mindful of people who are suspicious. And so I'm very proud of how we handled that incident. They paid all cash. I went to the ATM and got cash back for them because we had paid. The other thing is we are good to, on our conferences, the bus drivers to the off-site, we tip them. Most people don't tip the bus drivers, but we tipped them, and we had Jordan Page there, an awesome singer. We paid his expenses, and then we tipped him, we gave him some additional money on top of that. So that was the cash that from the day before that these guys gave us. So I had to go to the ATM and take out money to pay these guys back. But we made them sit, Dan, and wait for their money, because we wanted to vet these guys and make sure that we weren't making a mistake by saying, here's your money back, and turning them away. But we know it was the right thing to do.
It is. Debbie, it sounds like we're wrapping up.